Good afternoon, everybody. This is Susan Heaton-Wright from Superstar Communicator. We organise events like this, as well as coaching. I am a speaker and facilitator of workshops and masterclasses on all areas of spoken communication, impact, presence, and influence. Now, you will see today my co-host, Nick Simon, isn't here. So it's me on my own. And if you are watching, please make sure that you put in the chat that you're watching and any questions that you have. I am absolutely delighted and so excited to invite back Dr. Paddy Ross, who's an associate professor of psychology at Durham University. His work looks at children's ability to recognize emotions as well as social interactions more generally. And anybody who has seen me speak will know when I'm talking about nonverbal communication, I have quoted Dr. Paddy Ross's work with gestures and facial expressions. He has been doing a lot of work on the impact of your background when you're working virtually, and has had some of his work and research actually published in international publications, which is absolutely incredible. So Paddy, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me back. It's a pleasure.
Well, you had such a positive impact to my listeners and also for me when you came last time that it seemed the right time to reach out to you again.
No, that's super. As you mentioned, we did some fun stuff on Zoom backgrounds that hopefully we'll talk about that are certainly pretty pertinent at the minute.
So let me know what you have found, how you researched this and what your findings were.
Sure. So in about 2019, I had a master's student who we were going to do something on trust and competence and first impressions and that sort of thing. And then, as everybody knows, the following March, we all went into lockdown. The pandemic sort of gripped the UK and the world. And she ended up moving back home. Home for her was the British Virgin Islands, which isn't the worst place to be holed up.
No.
And we conducted then the entire sort of, dissertation project and supervision and things online. And we got to thinking this was a very different way of communicating all of a sudden. It seems so commonplace now, and it's so ubiquitous, for everybody, talking on Teams or Zoom, or, everyone remembers sort of quiz nights with friends and family during lockdown and things. Everyone had to get to grips with the new technology. But for us, it was quite novel, and we didn't want to change off of first impressions. She was really interested in that, and so am I. And we realized that, well, this is really a new way that we are making first impressions. Anyone that's watching this live stream will be able to see my office, which Susan knows I hastily tidied before coming on air. Usually I talk with a green screen behind me and project maybe a nice image of Durham or just a blank blue wall. So I had to tidy up pretty sharpish. But again, that what's behind me, my environment that I'm in, is something that I now have to think about in terms of making a good first impression. You see more of my background than you do of me. And that's true of most communication on Zoom. So we did this project where we basically wanted to know whether altering the Zoom background affected people's first quick impressions of faces. So we took faces from this online open source database. Anyone can get them. And the faces are male and female, and they're either neutral, which means just no expression at all, or smiling. And we randomly mixed all those up and concocted this sort of fake Zoom background in which to put the pictures. And what we did was we didn't tell participants anything about the background. We just said, you're going to see a load of faces online. Just give us your initial impression. of how trustworthy they look and how competent you think they look. And what we did was we were actually changing, the backgrounds from one image to the next. We had 6 backgrounds altogether. We had a background that showed plants and greenery, a background of a bookcase, nice studious bookcase, a background just of a living room. Then we had a blurred living room. I know there's like a blur function on most of these applications. Just a blank background, and then we had a novelty background that I know people like to use. This was of we wanted something that was impossible, not something that you could feasibly have. So we just had them in the Antarctic, like it was a walrus on an iceberg behind them and things. And that allowed us just to gather a load of data on people were rating these faces, but sort of without realizing their ratings were changing based on which background the face was in front of. So what we found overall was that plants and bookcases elicited the highest levels of trust and competence in people's first impressions, whereas the novelty one was the least. Home actually came out low, similar to novelty.
Really?
Yeah, and the blurred home and the blank were somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
So we weren't expecting the home, but overall those were the results. And the interesting thing about that is I've interviewed several people on Zoom, and it's a really different experience. It must be as well for an interviewee. Before, when you went into an interview, you would think about how you were presented, your hair or lack thereof, in my case, your suit, your formal dress, your just general appearance. But you've never really had to, open up part of your home to people you don't know in that way. And it turns out that actually makes a big difference. And especially in an interview setting, first impressions are really important. A lot of research shows that actually a first impression that you make is really hard to shake in someone, even if they're presented with, contrary or evidence to the contrary.
They've got to work very hard to change that perception.
That's right.
You mentioned about blurring a room and also green screen. I know that you said that you often use a green screen.
Mhm.
When I see people on a green screen, or that they have some of my clients, they're corporate and they have a certain screen that they have behind them.
Mhm.
And part of me questions where they are. And particularly with green screen, there can be a sort of lapse when you're moving. Does that make an impact?
Yes, for a couple of reasons. I mean, the green screen can hide stuff.
Yes.
Basically, I use it in my office here because there's a clatter of kids' stuff behind me. There's a pink kids writing desk behind me as well, as you can see that. Quality matters. So the quality of the green screen, I have a pull-up one that doesn't crease, so the light hits it, in the right way. But that's an expensive setup, for someone who's just talking, doing meetings, whatever. I use it for lecturing. Most of the time. It allows me to inhabit essentially a virtual space rather than a real space. That takes some of the first impression and distraction, frankly, away from the viewing experience of me talking or teaching. I've got even this kind of simple office I'm sitting in. For those that can't see it, there's a window over my right shoulder. There's a plaque on the wall. There's a big Sean Connery print I got years ago sitting behind a guitar amp. There's a little bookcase and a heater over there for the winter over my left shoulder. There's, even in a simple space like that, there's a lot to look at that isn't me. And as people know, if they've ever looked at somebody, not only do you want to be a bit nosy in what is behind people, but it is just generally more distracting. You get the same thing in classrooms where very busy classroom walls, although colorful and great for sort of, presenting kids work and giving them, good confidence that their stuff's on the wall, is actually really distracting for some children who find it hard to focus. They will look everywhere except at the teacher when they're talking. And you may find, if you're trying to get a point across and talk to someone and really engage with them, that if your background is very busy, it's very easy for them just to glance at something else and look everywhere except at you. Whereas in an interview setting, you're usually sitting in a pretty blank, bland office space in which you are the sole focus of the interview. And it's something that it is distracting and detracting from you as a candidate or as a person trying to talk in these spaces.
So I'm sure that mine's very distracting.
It's colourful.
It shows that I'm thinking. I'm organised. But what about blurred ones? Because sometimes I put a blur in.
Mm-hmm.
Does that distract, or does that detract from trustworthiness? Are people thinking, oh my goodness, she's hiding something?
Yeah, it's the hiding something that we thought we would find. So you mentioned before as well the sort of the lag you get sometimes in green screen
Yes.
projection. The technology now can try to track your head and your face and try to keep you as sort of clear as possible. But you'll know if you have, long hair or are wearing something on your head, it finds that difficult. I mean, hair is difficult to track, and you get this sort of unusual clipping through your head as you're moving. And if you blur the background, that in itself is distracting. What we thought we would find is, I mean, just anecdotally, I find blurring pretty suspicious, and it shouldn't be. It's just this. It's the first button that you click. You want to hide your background, but it's the word hide, right? You sort of it feels like, what are you hiding back there? Why can't you show me the nice sort of neat workspace you're working in? But at the same time, it keeps it anonymous. It keeps it so that you don't have to show off your home. And we found that the blurred background of the home actually gave better ratings of trust and competence than the home. But that's not necessarily, but that's not necessarily to say that it's good.
Yeah.
It was better than something that wasn't good.
Yes.
But it wasn't as good as plants or bookcases. And we think what happens is the home background that we used was a living room setting.
Okay.
And it could just be that just looks quite unprofessional. It looks like you're sat on a sofa in a living room rather than, or at the kitchen table. It doesn't look very worky, for want of a better phrase.
That's really interesting. You remember back 4 years ago when there were people that they were dialing in from their bedrooms.
Yeah. Yeah, you could see their bed or unmade bed behind them.
Yes, the unmade bed.
Absolutely. So it could be that blurring that, maybe it shows a sign of knowledge that this isn't a very professional space, and maybe not knowing where you are is better than someone knowing that actually you are sitting, on the edge of your bed or something. But again, some people have no choice. That might be the only place you sit in your house is at your kitchen table. It's the easiest place to work, and behind you just happens to be the fridge. Well, so be it. No, that's everyone can't have a private office in their, somewhere in their house. I mean, this doubles as a kids' playroom, office for me, guitar studio, everything, and it's also got a clatter of stuff in it that just gets dumped in here because it's only me that ever sees it, and I don't see it when the green screen's up. So I mean, blurring is better than showing, it seems, a non-work related space. Blank background is very similar. I get a lot of people who think, right, let's do nothing away, just a clear blank background. And that's fine, but it's neither of them are as good as plants or a bookcase.
Really interesting.
And that,
Is there anybody on the call? Is there anybody that would like to introduce themselves and to ask a question? Because I've got loads of questions. You mentioned about trust and concept. I mean, this is why you went down this route. I find this really interesting because you said about first impressions and people can therefore demonstrate trust. What does that look like from your perspective?
well, one of the reasons that we think that plants and bookcases came out on top really is, if you are trying to present yourself in an interview,
Yeah.
it's a nice sort of analogy for it. You want to come across as studious, responsible, trustworthy. Um, Having books behind you makes you look more trustworthy. It makes you look well read. These might be books you have never picked up in your entire life. You remember at the start of the pandemic, every politician was sitting in an office surrounded by as many books as they could possibly. Well, that led to people then zooming in and trying to find out which books were on their shelves.
Yes, it's true.
Just, it's
We
taking
had too much time on our hands.
Yeah, exactly. Plants is an interesting one because keeping plants alive shows responsibility. It shows you are trying to better your space. The interesting thing is, when I have a little plant, I'm not sure if people can see it over my left shoulder.
Yes.
It's fake. And what we wondered was, will this make a difference? Do the plants actually have to be real, or can it just be a background of plants? And so we ran another little experiment that's unpublished. And what we did was, instead of using images, we actually recorded students in a sort of faux interview, and we ran in, changed the background, recorded them, ran in, changed the background, recorded them again. And so we had a few different versions. One was of real plants behind them, one was of nothing, one was of virtual plants, and one was a virtual blank background. We actually found that the virtual plant background was better than the real plant background. And it's hard to say why, because I had assumed that real plants would give bigger trust, because, hey, look, he can actually keep real plants alive. He's, taking care of them. He's taking time out of his day to do this. But the thing is, we don't have professional lighting setups, most of us. We don't know how to light a background to look good. Most times you see people, there's maybe a window beside them, they're badly lit, or the window's behind them, their face is grey and ashen, and it's, I have windows to the side here, but if I tilted my camera, you'd hardly see my face because of all the light coming from behind. It's like if you've ever taken a photo into the sun, the subject of your photo does not look great. And, in an office, in the setting we had it in, you have this sort of fluorescent top-down lighting, which actually doesn't make plants look very good. And with the virtual background of plants, they are bright green, lovely white background. They really pop. And maybe even that is enough to convey the idea that you've thought about your background. And
so interesting.
You've put time into actually thinking about how to present yourself, and you're presenting yourself in this way that you aren't artificial. You like green things. You are presenting yourself in a way that isn't just, where's the whitest, blankest room in my house? Let's point because that's going to look just not great without proper lighting. Whereas being able to have a nice virtual background takes all that out of it. You can have the most pristine looking, crisp, plant and bookcase background going, and it's going to look better.
Amazing. Now, I remember it was back in 2021. I worked with an American company. Have to be careful because there's an NDA attached to the work that I did. But they wanted work on how to make more impact, how to be more trustworthy when pitching. And one of the things, the two of the things that I highlighted were sound and lighting, which the feedback they gave back to me was that was too basic. Yet when I did individual coaching with them, half of them I could hardly see them. Yeah. Yeah.
It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, our lectures, for instance, when they all went online, we have a system in which you can sort of have your slides up. You're just talking into your laptop. It's recording. Yes. You're a little video in the corner, and there's slides. And looking at some of those, I mean, the sound quality's dreadful. People are going to have to sit for 2 hours and watch these things. They can't see you, really. And this is one of the reasons that I bought the green screen. I wanted to be able to record myself basically on the slides, sort of weatherman style.
Yes.
Using a green screen. So I'm sort of front and center in there. I bought a proper microphone. I didn't want to use, I know these webcams come with little microphones, but they're not good.
Yeah, absolutely.
The difference in clarity. I had these, people won't be able to see them most likely. Just over my shoulder there's a load of soundboards for the walls. Because I'm sitting right in front of a wall, and it becomes quite echoey and tinny, to be honest. It might sound a little echoey and tinny now. So I had that padded with lovely sort of sound-absorbing foam, which promptly all fell off the wall. And it kept falling on top of my computer. So I took them off, but that made some difference to the quality of the sound. And if everybody's sat through a Teams meeting where, as you say, the person's badly lit, you can hardly see them, their sound quality's dreadful, and it just detracts from, they could be saying the most interesting thing in the world, and you're just gonna not be paying as much attention to them and really taking it in as you would if they looked crisp, were well lit, and sounded clean. And it's funny. I mean, you can't assume that people do that because you need to buy extra stuff to do it. You really do. I have lights here that, I can shine in my face. They're bouncing off the wall. I'm bouncing here. I have a reasonable microphone. The room acoustically isn't great. Yeah, there it is. I have these big numbers here. It doesn't work too well to shine them right in my face, but they bounce off the wall nicely and give me a front.
But I was just really surprised that they felt that was too basic, yet they were demonstrating that, which moves me swiftly on. And we were discussing this beforehand about the Moravian model of personal communication. And you picked up on one really interesting thing, because what he said was the person watching will be distracted if it doesn't match what you're saying. So that's a perfect example. If you can't see the person and their facial expressions online, and also you can't hear them, you then get distracted and think, oh, I need to do my shopping list or something. You switch off. It's as basic as that, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah, it's so easily done. I mean, not only are you trying to watch someone on a small screen and listen to them, you also see yourself on a different small screen.
Yes.
And most people, when they're talking online, are looking at themselves talking. You tend, because if I'm looking at you talking, I'm actually looking at you on a screen. I'm not looking at you. If I want to look like I'm looking at you, I need to look directly into the webcam. But now I can't see myself and I can't see your reaction. So now I can't see if you're nodding or smiling or shaking your head or disgusted or whatever. So it's a really disconnected experience. On top of that, you're in a different room with a load of stuff around you as well. So, I mean, I've got clutter on my desk. I've got a coffee, I've got a coffee chair, I've got my phone, I've got notes, I've got loads of other stuff I could be that is going to take my attention away if I'm not listening or focusing on you. One thing that it is in that model is the importance of tone of voice compared to what you're actually saying.
Yes.
And this, I mention this just because a good chunk of my research is looking at something called auditory dominance.
Right.
Is
Can
this
you
idea
explain that for?
Sorry?
Can you explain that for?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So there was an experiment back in the 70s by a researcher called Colavita, and what they did was they flashed a light and they said, whenever you see a flash, push this button. Whenever you hear a beep, hit this other button.
Yeah.
And then what they would do is they would, on purpose, but they said it was accidental, play them both at the same time. So you hear a beep and you see a flash, and you just say to the participant, oh, that was a mistake. Just hit whatever button, feels right. And what you'll find is adults hit the button for the flash, but kids hit the button for the beep. So they seem to be sort of predisposed to focusing on the auditory. And we wondered whether this would work for emotion recognition. So we did a few studies where we had images of people being emotional, say cowering in fear and backing away with their hands up, but we played the sound of someone, say, being happy, laughing, and you just ask adults and kids, how's that person feeling? And adults will say scared. Kids younger than 7 tend to say happy, even when they see them cowering in fear. And what we then did was we wondered whether, let's get rid of the visual stimuli altogether. Let's just look at the auditory. So we had these sentences mocked up of people saying happy things or sad things. I went to the park with my mum and she bought me my favorite ice cream. But what if you say that then in a sad way? That happy context, but I went to the park with my mum and she bought me my favorite ice cream. Or you say it in an angry way. And you just ask then kids and adults, how's that person feeling? And we actually found the opposite. It makes sense for the model, but not for what we found before, where kids tend to stick with the verbal description or the content of the what was actually said, whereas adults tend to say that person, that last example, would be sad, even though
that interesting
is I went to the park and had my favorite ice cream. If it's said in a sad way, the person's sad. So they seem to be much more reliant on the way you say things rather than what you said than children.
So that fits in with the Morabian theory, doesn't it? And I keep nagging you to do a virtual version. I'm happy to come up to Durham to work with you on it because so many people are asking me about this. We have a question from Paul. Hi, Paul. I hope you're well. Hi, Paddy. Which platform would you recommend for overall quality and function? Really good one, Paul.
It is. So it's the cop-out answer is a mixture of a couple of things. So if you use Zoom or Teams, they have built in, I presume this is about video conferencing platforms. They have built in things that can blur your background and you can add virtual backgrounds and things. There's a free bit of software called OBS Studio. If you've ever seen anyone streaming video games or creating YouTube videos, that's what they use. What it allows you to do is set up a virtual webcam through that software, which then you can use. Basically, it'll project whatever you put on that onto your video conferencing software. And it means you can really have a play around with that and sort your background on that system, start a virtual webcam, and that's what people will see in Teams or Zoom or anything. Unfortunately, not on this stream because it didn't work. Otherwise, I would be in sort of a blue matrix style background that I usually use. Basically, it looks like I'm trapped in Microsoft Windows. I use Teams primarily just because that's what Durham University uses. But I always use OBS Studio as a sort of a gateway into that, because I can control the quality, I can control the mic levels, I can control the lighting, the background, everything. Particularly if you say we're presenting something as well, you can either do the share screen function where people just see what you're looking at and they can't see you anymore. Whereas with OBS, what you could do is put yourself on the slides or the graph or whatever you're presenting, like the example I used earlier, like a weatherman in front of a green screen. And then they can see you and the slides, and it's a much more sort of interactive and engaging way of communicating information.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Paul, for that. Are there any other questions? Because, Paddy's here to answer questions. I do have another question here. I know that you focus on children, and you've already mentioned that it seems to be that there's a cutoff of about the age of 7, that then children begin to see and interpret things in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Does this have an impact on the way that adults recognize emotions, or in your experience, are adults learning different things in ways to interpret?
So adults tend to rely on what they see more than what they hear.
Okay.
Kids tend to rely on what they hear more than what they see. Why that is pretty open to debate. We know that kids are already adult-like in their ability to recognize emotions from the face and the body by sort of 7, 8 years old. Whereas it takes them longer to recognize emotions in the voice, particularly fear and anger, which could be just that they don't actually have a great deal of exposure to fearful voices when they're younger, which is a good thing. But they don't tend to get that until a little bit later on. The explanation for that, to be speculative, could be a evolutionary one, where when you are 4, 5, 6 years old, you are 3 feet tall and you can't actually see very far. You're too short to see danger coming. You can hear someone shout who can see the danger from 2 miles away with their eyes. You see this in the animal kingdom, where you have you see it in great apes, and even in meerkats, they do the same thing. They have a spotter. They have an adult spotter who is up a tree or on a mound and can see for miles, who then shouts, and then the little ones hear the shout because they cannot see the threat from far away. And it pays to be able to see things from far away and recognize whether what's coming over the hill is a danger or not, to then vocalize that. And the young kids are much, much more responsive to the way that you say things rather than what they're seeing.
Oh, that's interesting. We've got another question here. I don't know who this person is, but it doesn't say the name, but hi there. What about the person themselves? On top of the background, should we wear specific colors, makeup, etc.?
It's interesting, because all I've talked about is the background. So thanks for the question, rather than the person themselves. Obviously, you can't, if you're trying to make a good first impression, you should still do the things that you're doing if you're trying to make a good first impression face to face. But what you need to be mindful of is you're going to be seen through a screen. And as we've been talking about before, how are you lit? If you're blurring your background, does doing your hair that way make that blur really not look very good? If you've got a ponytail that comes out the top, I've seen it before, every time you move, the camera can't track that very well, and it just looks like you've got a digitized sort of thing sticking out the top of your head. If you're using a green screen, you cannot wear green because it will pick that up and make you look invisible. it's just an extension of what you're wearing. I mean, what we found was we had faces in the main study that we did that were male, female, smiling, and neutral. And across the board, actually, we found that female faces were deemed more trustworthy and competent than the male faces.
That's
and
interesting.
that smiling was deemed more trustworthy and competent than being neutral. So rather than being something that replaces how you look and how you present yourself, it's just something else that we need to think about in addition to that, really. I mean, I've seen people give TV interviews where they're wearing shorts because they don't need to stand up and all this. But I mean, I was chatting to Susan earlier before we came on, and I cleared up some stuff from behind me. She may noticed I had slippers on. She may not have done, but at least I had jeans on. And I've seen it before where you're presenting the top half of your body essentially. If you have to stand up, for goodness sake, make sure you've got the full works on, and not just wearing a jacket and tie but nothing underneath. But it's what I mentioned it before. I mean, I'm not trying to plug OBS Studio, but if you are using something like that, not only do you are you able to see, on the screen before most people when they join Teams, they click camera on, join, and then they see what their background looks like to other people. And I mean, when I joined this, it was a much more closed view I got. And then when I joined, it essentially the camera has a fish eye really wide. That I didn't realize it was going to do that. Whereas what OBS will allow you to do is completely manage how you're going to look before you even click on. So you'll see how your clothes, makeup, hair looks, and it's just being aware of that before you click, okay, let's go. Let's turn my camera on and join this meeting, join this interview. It's essentially like looking at yourself in the mirror before you leave the house.
What a brilliant tip. And that is, the question was from Jill Patterson. Thank you for that. I've got one. I will do Adrian's question first. Hi, Adrian. Sorry for having to leave and come back. Adrian has the most incredible organization, teaching little kids to drive little cars in the playground. I mean, I just wish I was 5. Again, are there any rules about what to wear on online meetings? People seem to go quite casual in my experience. Thank you for that, Adrian.
Yeah, it's the working from home curse, isn't it? It's you feel comfortable in your own space, and so you do go casual to meetings. It's hard to say, right? It's hard to say without knowing the organization, without knowing who you're talking to. If I was just joining in my institution for a meeting, I know everyone there, I know it's reasonably informal, I don't have to really worry about, wearing anything more than the t-shirt and the jumper. If I was lecturing, I would usually wear a shirt and a jumper. That's just my preference. I know people that don't. Again, if you're looking to make a good first impression, it's going to matter what you're wearing. It is true that when people join, they do get casual, and it's the same people who go casual are the same people who are likely to use a novelty background for a laugh, like an Iron Throne background or a Emperor Palpatine chair in Star Wars or something. And that's grand for people that you know. People that you don't know, though, it just lowers their ratings of your competence. And it'll be the same for casual wear. If you're talking to people you have never met before, you probably wouldn't turn up and talk to them face to face in casual wear if you were trying to make a good first business impression. And it's exactly the same online. You're presenting yourself just the same as you would do if you were meeting someone for the first time, but you're also presenting your space in the same way. And it's just to bear that in mind.
Brilliant. Adrian has corrected me. He said, we also teach older children at secondary schools. Do you do away days for adults? I mean, I think we need to do that. But finally, we do have a question, another question from Paul. And this is related. Don't you find OBS or vMix introduce an audio delay for other users? Which is an interesting techie question. I wouldn't expect anything less from Paul.
I haven't found that. It may well be that there is. It's hard for me, I guess, to know what how other people are hearing me. I can sort of tell what they're seeing, but not what they're hearing. I haven't. It could be a case of the microphone setup that you're using. I guess it's going through a third-party thing to come back to Teams or Zoom. So there's more processing needs done before it gets there. But it's not something I've encountered. Certainly recording in OBS for lectures, say if I'm making an online recording that then I'm putting out, I haven't noticed such a thing. So I do online lectures then that are recorded live, and I go through OBS for that, and I've not noticed, but I'm sure there must be community forums and such as well for OBS that someone else must have found that issue.
Maybe it's where you live, Paul. Maybe you don't have good Wi-Fi in Tundridge. Anyway, can you, before we finish, we've got fantastic content here, and I know that there are people that have been asking questions. I've put in the chat Paddy's email address, and I know that he said that if anybody wants to contact him, that's the best way of contacting him. Before we finish, do you have 3 top tips very quickly on what to make sure that you make an impact online?
So to summarize the findings and what we've been talking about so far is make sure you are aware of your background. You're presenting your background like you're presenting your suit or your outfit or yourself. It takes up a bigger amount of space on your screen and people will be looking at it. So make sure you sort out your background. If you can at all, remember to smile. We find that was a really clear finding in that Zoom background study, is smiling faces just look more trustworthy and competent. And don't be afraid to blur. If you can't have green screens and can't have fancy backgrounds, try to put light in front of your face. You can blur the background, you will stand out. And then you don't really need to worry about what your background looks like. Also, as a little fourth one, if you can run down to the garden centre and get some plants and throw them behind you, all the better.
Oh, that is fantastic. Paddy, it's always an absolute pleasure and an honour to have you here on the live stream, which will be made into a podcast. I know that the people watching here have got an awful lot out of it. If for any reason you want to contact Paddy directly, I have put his email address in the chat, but I will share it afterwards. Thank you again, Paddy. So this is Susan from Superstar Communicator. Bye-bye until next time.